And now, Third Mind Books presents Have a Pleasant Trip, 210 Center Street, New York City, 1965, The Cut-Up Life of William S. Burroughs. From approximately the early spring through early autumn of 1965, William S. Burroughs resided at 210 Center Street in Lower Manhattan. During this residency, WSB befriended one David Prentice, an artist who then lived in the same building. Unlike many of WSB's younger associates, such as Ian Somerville, he and Prentice apparently did not share an intimate relationship, but rather a warm and mutually helpful friendship. Prentice found WSB to be friendly and gracious, a good companion to even just dine and talk with. These uncontroversial and pleasant interactions belied the fragments surrounding WSB and the substance of his own writings, as well as what others expressed to him. We contacted and interviewed Prentice, who recounted what he could from the mists of time about his experiences with WSB during this period. For many years, Prentice retained a cache of primary materials from WSB, both by and mostly to him, which he preserved and we acquired at auction during 2019. There is correspondence from a wide variety of aspiring writers, friends, associates, publishers, and various admirers. Very importantly, there are two typed manuscript pages of original cut-up writings, one definitely by WSB, another possibly written or edited by Alan Anson. Also of importance is some fragmentary work product by an Italian translator of WSB's work, Donatella Manganotti, regarding the soft machine. This led us to obtain copies of Manganotti's archive of correspondence between her and WSB, along with more translation-related work product. Our immersion in these materials took us inside the mind of WSB, how he advised Manganotti to translate such untranslatable writings. Our close reading of Prentice's WSB materials revealed several primary factors. There is the extreme magnetic influence of WSB, the fervor associated with his literary innovations, especially the cut-ups, which are complemented, imitated, and sometimes half-consciously evoked in the correspondence to him. We can behold their viral effect. Another dimension revealed to us is the cut-up nature of WSB's own life, including materials relating to the famed Valentine's Day reading, WSB's then still ongoing censorship struggles, his financial imbroglio with Maurice Garodius, and even poignant personal relics relating to his parents, son, and brother. As we imbibe these disparate pieces of the Burroughsian puzzle, the effect is fragmentary, unsettled, incantatory, like a cut-up text. And so, let's now begin to broadly explore the cut-up life and work of William S. Burroughs. Among the most significant documents in the collection, as it led us to an exploration of archaeological Burroughsian cut-up maniacism, as we'll see, is a 13-page typed list of short quotes from an unidentified WSB manuscript with handwritten marginalia. We discovered that this document, dating from approximately late 1964, early 1965, was compiled and annotated by one Donatella Manganotti, a young Italian scholar and translator, and that the typed fragments are from The Soft Machine, a translation of which into Italian, entitled La Morbida Macchina, was published in August 1965, as noted in Maynard and Miles' bibliography, entry D32, page 193. By the way, the indispensable classic M&M is dedicated to Ian Somerville and Manganotti, who abruptly died in 1968. As we know, there are no less than 4 published versions of The Soft Machine in English, only the first of which, the 1961 Olympia Press edition, had been issued at the time Manganotti was working with WSB on her translation. The year following the appearance of La Morbida Macchina, the second English language edition of The Soft Machine was published by Grove Press in the USA in 1966. The texts of the Olympia and Grove editions are famously different, so we conducted an exercise to confirm our gut feeling that the manuscript with which Manganotti was working was a close precursor to the 1966 edition. I did painstakingly confirm that the vast majority of the fragments are equivalent to that edition, though the order of paragraphs and chapters may have been somewhat different. This exercise necessitated a much closer and more repetitive reading of a WSB cut-up than we had ever theretofore engaged in. And I tell you, the incantatory trance induced in our minds was a new dimension, a change of mental metabolism itself. I really cannot verbalize this phenomenon, this third mind indeed, and can only suggest that you find a port of entry to experience it yourselves. The very notion of translating a high WSB cut-up into another language and our burgeoning interest in Manganotti led us to dig deeper than on any other Center Street relic, and we ultimately obtained copies of every item in the archive of correspondence and work product between WSB and Manganotti, held at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. We were astonished at the brilliant, complete, and even prescient grasp of WSB's genius held by young, alas forever young, Donatella Manganotti, and noted WSB's own appreciation of her profound comprehension of his work, resulting in his accommodation and collaboration with a female, quite a rarity. The full contents of the Manganotti WSB archive could easily be the subject of this entire presentation, but I'll just briefly share a few highlights. In a letter of January 8, 1962, Manganotti writes, "I am already halfway through The Soft Machine, and though Naked Lunch remains my favorite, I'm simply fascinated by it, and, just as I did with Naked Lunch, I'll go on reading and rereading some of its passages in the hope of grasping every time a little more of its secret message, or of its learned allusions, like the Maya corn god, etc." Even more remarkably, later in that same letter, she adds, "I've also reread On the Road to find the thinly veiled characterization of William Lee, and I've been simply fascinated by Old Bull Lee, even if I won't use it for my article, because I do feel that being shrouded in legend and mystery is particularly becoming to a personality such as yours." And so, Manganotti here demonstrated a Burroughsian phenomenon among his acolytes, the secret of fascination that would be defined for the ages decades later by Dr. Oliver Harris in his critical study of that very title. Speaking of acolytes, it is notable that Manganotti's all-out worship of WSB was expressed in virtually all her letters to him, and surpasses even that of Patti Smith in the following decade. Shortly after meeting WSB in person for the first time, she wrote on January 3rd, 1962, "And I'm afraid I didn't even tell you how important it was for me to have met you, not only because of my little work on your books, but above all for what you are, what you represent, what you will be to mine and the next generations, the real writer of the future, the prophet of our doomed civilization." Her reverent supplication went together with an understanding of his profundity. WSB was generous toward Manganotti with insights and guidance on his works. He respectfully recognized her remarkably clear understanding of what I am attempting, as he put it in a letter dated February 13th, 1962. There, he notably also writes, "You will see that my final message is not one of despair and regression to dead-end life forms. On the contrary, that is why I am arranging to publish Novia Express, as he termed that then work in progress, first in America. It really should be read first to facilitate understanding of the other works." Returning to Manganotti's consultations with WSB in preparing her translation of The Soft Machine, we have these documents in the Manganotti file, which help to fill in the story we were introduced to by the manuscript in the Prentice archive, and over which we subjected ourselves to cut-up psychosis, as previously discussed. There is a letter from Manganotti to WSB dated October 20th, 1964, as desperate and plaintive and worshipful as ever, after a long period during which she had not heard from him. I haven't heard from you in eons. I am really most depressed, more than I can say. The book, that is her translation of The Soft Machine, is completely finished and is waiting only for you. Please, please, please write to me and try to arrange a meeting, even at a shot notice. A most significant Freudian substitute for short, no? In a letter dated February 9th, 1965, WSB wrote to Manganotti, I am sorry to be so slow about writing and sending you the material on The Soft Machine. I have been traveling constantly. New York, St. Louis, Florida, living out of a suitcase. Can't find anything and difficult to keep up correspondence. Mr. Garodius' affairs are in a complete mess. He is bankrupt, and one does not know who to deal with legally. Finally, WSB wrote this cover letter to Manganotti, dated April 30th, 1965. I enclose The Soft Machine, inquiries, which I have answered as best I could. When in doubt, always translate literally. The enclosure referred to is this 13-page list of typed phrases from WSB's manuscript of The Soft Machine, with Manganotti's handwritten or typed inquiries and WSB's typed answers in a different, deeper font. The list of phrases is very similar but not quite identical to that of our original 13-page document in the Prentice collection, as the handwritten comments and questions by Manganotti are only to be found in the enclosure from the Manganotti file. We are constrained here from studying WSB's explanations of each of the several hundred phrases here, but we can identify a constant theme, a long thread of blood, if you will. As WSB stated in the cover letter, he consistently advised Manganotti to translate as literally as possible between the two languages. He wanted, again and again, the reader of English or Italian to conjure some personal, coherent image or idea from the chance encounters among words in the cut-up texts. In one example, Manganotti asks whether the phrase two tape recorders mutations means two tapes of mutations. WSB answers that phrase means a mutation resulting from conjecture of two tape recorders. We must proceed, but let us respectfully acknowledge the importance of Donatella Manganotti's work to the Burroughsian legacy, well worth digging into further. There are two letters in the collection from Ian Somerville to WSB, and one to Brian Geisen, handwritten in a unique, striking cursive calligraphy. A brilliant young computer scientist and engineer, Somerville was a key technical facilitator for WSB, with whom he shared a very intimate personal relationship. Somerville, under the spell of his mentor WSB, was very receptive to the hallucinatory aspects of the cut-ups, and applied essentially cut-up and collage methods to audio tape experimentation, artworks such as his jacket design for Dead Fingers Talk, and even, we might say, to his engineering of the Dream Machine under the inspiration of Burroughs and Geisen. Somerville's letter to WSB, dated January 2nd, 1964, is especially influenced by the cut-ups, as well as the pre-proto-cut-up collage stream style of Naked Lunch. As in the first sentences, they're getting closer. Faithful, careful, no boffin silence. Ajax people, croupier, that scriptwriter minute. 28 year, that's mine. What? Fetch another pint? Fetch another pint? Do you want to do round, please? Nice night round, please. Now, a boffin, as you Brits here would know, is an informal term for a person with knowledge or a skill considered to be complex, arcane, and difficult. This term, we think, could apply to both Somerville and WSB. The letter becomes more lucid as it progresses, and the two main topics we can decipher are poverty and sex. He laments his affliction with venereal disease, so that I can't really do much of anything until medical clearance. In a postscript dated January 5th, Somerville excitedly reported that clearance, subject to a recheck 2 weeks hence, when he'd again be now lovable. Somerville's letter to WSB dated December 3rd, 1964 is quite lucid. Here he writes about a successful course of treatment for what he alludes to as another case of VD, complains of the publisher Alexander Calder's improper reproduction of his cover artwork for Dead Fingers Talk, and writes half-heartedly about traveling to live in the USA, subject to employment in an income from WSB and his famous invention. Also, R.E., stateside, would you really be prepared to pay that fare and salary yet? From Burroughs Company. Otherwise, I can wait for Dream Machine developments. As with the previous letter, it is both promiscuous and very affectionate, and ends with the greeting, "Love from your upside-down airman." The third and final letter from Somerville in the collection is dated January 7th, 1965, and is addressed to Brian Geisen. It's interesting to speculate how this letter ended up in the hands of WSB, as he and Geisen both were in Tangier at the time. Perhaps Geisen gave it to WSB after reading it, and it made its way to Center Street thereafter. This rather short letter is lucid, good-humored, and, like the others, is mostly about poverty and sexual innuendo. But one sentence stands out for our purposes. "My cut-ups all come true, a very mixed blessing, and get me high." Ted Joans, a major and influential poet of the Beat generation and beyond, was himself influenced by WSB, as we see in this wonderful letter. Although undated, the year 1964 is written at Jones' signature for his drawing of a rhinoceros, his characteristic motif, in this case, as an anthropomorphic figure with 3 legs and both male and female components. In it, he writes, "Sir, I ran across the tangerine bit in September Esquire. Dig it. It also prompted me to write this brief letter, my first letter to you." The Esquire magazine issue he refers to is certainly that of September 1964, referred to in Maynard and Miles as C83 on page 126, where WSB provides captions and notes to a photographic essay on Tangier. Elsewhere in the initial paragraph, Jones writes, "You are one of the great influences on my writing. Cats like you are boss cats. What I mean is you know how to handle and create American language. You are a whaler." In the second numbered section, Jones adds, "I would appreciate very much if you would send my collage cut-up book that I laid on you long time ago, if you can find it. There is a publisher here interested in it." That long time ago was likely the late 1950s at the Beat Hotel in Paris, where Jones once resided as part of the famous Beat scene there. He may have been a witness to the birth of the cut-ups, and it's interesting to consider whether the collage cut-up book Jones mentions was inspired by WSB scrapbooks, such as these, combining cut-up writings, collaged images, and drawings that he was beginning to create at the dawn of the cut-up period there, or vice versa. While not a cut-up per WSB with Brian Geisen's original method, this letter is clearly influenced in its structure and in the way that its sections could be read in various orders by the cut-ups. Barry Miles is a most authoritative figure in the life and work of WSB from the 1960s onward, author of 2 biographies and co-author with Joe Maynard of the classic indispensable bibliography that is at every Burroughsian side. Sure enough, there is a 2-page typewritten letter with enclosure in the collection from Miles to WSB, undated, but as we'll see, likely from sometime within the Center Street period. The first paragraph is most relevant to our cut-up quest. Miles refers to material sent to him by WSB that would be included in an upcoming issue of an anthology journal which would soon be produced. I quote Miles in abridgment. "The issue will probably have the title of Tsarad and will contain work by Tristan Tzara, who used a form of cut-up method at times, photographs by John Hopkins and Evan Duff, visual work by Nick Tidnam, and collages and drawings by yours truly, Miles, a fold-out broadsheet by Peter Maxwell Davis, and your work, WSB's, which will be on a background of stills from old movies." This passage is a window into the sausage-making legislative process, as the saying goes, which did soon lead to 2 related publications that I will briefly explain. Maynard and Miles refers in B16, page 94, to the Miles-edited production of Darazd, which is, of course, Tsarad spelled backwards, an anthology issued in July 1965 in a numbered edition of 500 copies. As noted, this in turn was issued as a companion to Lee Harwood's magazine Tsarad. It happens that my own collection includes copy number 137 of Darazd, where we see 4 of the contributors mentioned by Miles as I quoted in his letter: WSB, Miles himself, John Hopkins, and Lee Harwood. WSB's contribution, the first in this anthology, is entitled Who is Thee Walks Beside You, written third, presented as 4 pages in the 3-column cut-up format, with the final 5th page as a series of short, cut-up paragraphs, similar in structure to prose poetry stanzas. The proposed movie stills were omitted. The cut-up influence of WSB resonates to varying degrees among the other 3 contributors, most especially with Miles' 3 collages about sex suppression and repression, etc., as they are titled. The remainder of the Miles letter and the enclosure are devoted to a magnetized orgone accumulator gadget he was creating with WSB, including hand-drawn diagrams. This doesn't relate to the cut-ups per se, but one sentence at the end stands out. And all this is great material for visions and construction collages and free thought in elated moments. WSB was a critical mentor in literature and lifestyle to Alexander Trocchi, the brilliant but disturbingly troubled author and editor, and there are 2 letters from Trocchi to WSB in the Center Street collection. In the first letter, dated January 21st, 1964, Trocchi's grandiose hopes and plans, as well as desperate need for funding of his Sigma project, is breathlessly expressed and solicited to WSB. Toward the end of this letter, Trocchi suggests to WSB that he get involved with Dr. Timothy Leary's psychedelic project at Millbrook in upstate New York. We know, of course, that WSB was way ahead of Trocchi and had been there and done that as of several years before. In the second, longer and more significant letter, dated September 30th, 1964, Trocchi waxes even more maniacally about Sigma's imminently achieving the destruction of the established world's literary and social order, and is also even more plaintive and desperate in his plea for financial and moral support. I need help desperately, not only financial, which has at any rate been forthcoming, but the kind of moral intellectual help which only people like Robert Creeley and yourself can provide. A particular Burroughsian delight is this passage. Believe me, Bill, the wheel is rolling, and if only I could get together, even for 24 hours with you, to explain the vast potential which really is at hand, I am sure it would be the kind of shot in the arm our common poison never provided. Of note is that this later letter is all but certainly a reply to one written by WSB to Trocchi, dated September 10th, 1964, which was published in Rub Out the Word, the 2nd volume of WSB's letters, on page 166. Among other topics, WSB asks for more clarification from Trocchi about Sigma and mentions the Sigma publication, The Moving Times. In my own collection is this 1965 issue of The Moving Times, one of several with contributions by WSB, which contains his 2-column piece, Martin's Folly, more a classic routine than a cut-up. Maynard and Miles' entry for this, C109, page 137, notes that this one-sided production was originally meant to be pasted flat at London Underground stations, but this proved too expensive, and so it was folded and distributed as a periodical. The Center Street collection includes 1 letter each from Ted Berrigan and Ron Padgett, the great New York School poets, to WSB. Both refer and relate to the cut-up collage masterpiece Time, in which WSB transforms the American establishment's flagship magazine issue of November 30th, 1962, into a high cut-up of words and images. Time was published by Berrigan's C Press, and Berrigan, Padgett, and Joe Brainard were all involved in its editing and production. Brian Geisen provided 4 of his exemplary calligraphic drawings that are reproduced as a section of Time. WSB's own copy of the trade edition of Time, from which we have reproduced these images, is present in the collection, having first appeared in 1965, undoubtedly at the time of WSB's Center Street residency. Berrigan's letter, dated January 22nd, 1965, begins with this sentence: "Hope you had a pleasant trip and return," a serendipitous echo of the puzzling 1962 St. Louis Hotel ephemera found in the Prentice collection, and which is the vague symbol and title of this very expedition. Concerning Time, then in its pre-production phase, Berrigan writes, "What do you think about putting out all the material you gave me in one pamphlet? The Time pages would be best at 8 by 11, their normal size, instead of 8 by 14, the normal size for C. So why not just add the other approximately 20 pages to the end of the Time stuff with a page between them, and we'll even have a pamphlet that actually looks like Time with a Time appearing cover. If you'd rather not, then I'll just put it all right into this next issue of C." So at this juncture, WSB was offered a choice of having Time published as a contribution to a larger issue of Berrigan's C Journal, or as a separate production, as if it were a highly amended issue of Time itself. As we know, WSB took up Berrigan's suggestion and chose the latter. In the final paragraph, Berrigan writes, "Enclosed are some postcards I got at the Jesse James Cafe, site of the former Northfield Bank in Northfield, Minnesota. I thought you might like them or like to make use of them." Sure enough, the page of Time entitled "The Hemisphere" includes this image of Bob Younger, an outlaw gang associate of Jesse James. Paget's letter, dated March 17th, 1965, refers to Time in this postscript. "By the way, advance sales on the special editions of Time are coming along slowly but very steadily. I'm sure the book will pay for itself." In the body of this short letter, Paget writes, "Here is a page I made for a book Tom Veitch and I are doing. You might be interested in the headline in the upper left, which I clipped from the Tulsa Tribune, and which might be useful as a filler in your scrapbook." We found the page that Paget refers to here, and enclosed with this letter, inside WSB's copy of his Valentine's Day reading pamphlet. The headline from the Tulsa Tribune newspaper at upper left reads, "Study Reveals City's Worst Intersections," and the name of Tom Veitch is inserted repeatedly as a substitute for another's name in the original columned article below the headline. The whole page, with its collage of images and altered texts, is obviously modeled on, a homage to, WSB's scrapbook and cut-up pages. Among the correspondence to WSB by young aspiring writers in the Center Street collection, two precocious protégés stand out in their appreciation and understanding of his cut-up productions, as well as the degree to which he and his work cast a spell of influence upon them. John Ramsey Campbell was still only 18 years old when he wrote this letter to WSB, dated August 23rd, 1964. As Campbell discusses authors whom WSB apparently suggested to him and they both admired, he writes, "Alfred Bester is unusual, and some of his work, for example, The Star's My Destination, occasionally bears a superficial similarity to your own cut-up passages." Bester was an award-winning popular science fiction writer. When referring to an obscure author's pseudonym, Campbell writes, "Pseudonyms have always rather frightened me. One expects a mask to slip and something nameless to scuttle forth. Don't take this personally, Mr. Lee." A very Burroughsian image, as well as a nod to WSB's use of his mother's maiden name in the first edition of his first publication, Junkie, and never thereafter. Campbell went on to become a very successful and prolific writer of horror, fantasy, and science fiction in the UK, and must have gotten over that pseudonym phobia. He's used 3 of them. Graham Masterton was also still 18 when he wrote the second of 4 letters to WSB found in the collection, dated December 1st, 1964. Here, Masterton notes that he has enclosed a first copy of Rules of Duel, which is not present. But there's a reference to Rules of Duel in the Contributions to Books and Anthologies section of Maynard and Miles, B14, page 93, which states that this was privately printed by the author and contains both a foreword and a cut-up of that foreword by WSB. A letter dated February 16th, 1965, a month after Masterton turned 19, is particularly steeped in Burroughsiana. Here are some passages. In Mysterious Babies, I am trying to develop an English fold-in method of sorts, but adopted to the mood of Britain at the moment and based on semantic control of the reader's mind. Britons, though gullible, have an essential mistrust of mass media techniques as a matter of principle. So I am working on the movie principle of a key phrase to every 10 frames, so that it is sunk into the subconscious mind, only I am gently altering each progressive frame, leading the reader to new heights, I hope. There is a 4-page untitled manuscript fragment we found with the letters that we believe to be from Mysterious Babies, per the language of Masterton's February 16th, 1965 letter quoted above, whose 6th paragraph begins, writing my present novel of sorts, Mysterious Babies, of which I append a few snips. As evidenced by this short passage, Burroughs has burrowed into this very young man's brain. The subliminal incantatory effect of WSB's routines and cut-ups is unmistakable. Let me out, let me out. But on every side, a wall of heat swings and sways as indescribable insects spurt in painful pincers. Like a torch sways and swings as terrible red laugh pours into his panic. Sways and swings, swings and sways as red-hot mouth struggles around him. Must be airborne, sways and swings. Across his face, his armpits chop into him from all sides. Masterton, like Campbell, also went on to become a very acclaimed and prolific British writer in horror and sex instruction. He was editor of Mayfair, the softcore sex magazine that published WSB. Both of these writers are still active, and you can wager that the profound impact of their youthful mentor has moaned across their careers like foghorns over still oily water of tidal rivers. Here is one of the most poignant and significant pieces in the Prentice archive, a typed letter from Mortimer Burroughs, WSB's father, known as Moat, dated Thanksgiving of an unnoted year, which we have determined as 1964. Thanksgiving Day fell on November 26th of that year. It is, as we shall see, worth quoting at length, edited for readability, as it exemplifies the grammatically discombobulated prose of both father and son, laced with commentary. On his personal Florida home stationery, Moat writes, Thanksgiving, dear Bill. Mother and I are alone, so we will have a quiet dinner at the Petite Marmite restaurant, one of the best on Worth Avenue. How quiet indeed, and conventional. Billy came home for a few days last week, so he will not be here again until the Christmas holidays. He is attending the Green Valley School at Orange City, Florida, about 200 miles north of Palm Beach. It is rather an isolated community, so we let him buy a motorcycle that we could not afford. But then he wants to visit some of his friends at Rollins College occasionally, and it is about 40 miles away. He is very interested in the school, which is run on the principles of Somerville. He has been a great help to the headmaster, as this is his first year here. He likes taking care of the young kids and helping with the chores. He washes dishes, takes out the garbage, etc. The organization is a national one, and they are establishing schools around the country and Mexico. Bill is in the 12th grade and will graduate high school this year. He then wants to take some special courses in college and perhaps return to teach in one of the branches of this school. The above quoted section of Moat's letter all relates to WSB's son, William S. Burroughs III, known as William S. Burroughs Jr. or Billy. As we all know, Billy's grandparents, Moat and Laura Lee, took on his upbringing upon the death of his mother, Joan Vollmer Burroughs, in the notorious William Tell incident of September 6, 1951, in Mexico City, at the recklessly accidental hand of his father, when Billy was only 4 years old. From then until very shortly after the time of this letter, as we will see, the aging Moat and Laura Lee struggled to guide Billy through a straight and narrow path of normality, punctuated by occasional fatherly visits where even WSB tried to contribute to that normality with fishing excursions, bicycles, and so forth. As we know all too well, this was all to ever less avail. Billy was doomed, cursed from birth, as he put it himself. We have investigated this Green Valley school that Mote refers to, and the Somerville principles he refers to on which it was based. The British educator Alexander Neal founded Somerville School over a century ago, based in a nutshell on the principle that a school must be made to fit its individual students, and not the other way around. The Somerville concept became popular, and it was the basis for an outcropping of schools in the USA that reached its height exactly when Billy was attending Green Valley during the mid-1960s. In the UK and USA, the Neal-inspired schools, with their free-form and permissive lack of traditional structure, provoked controversy, and Green Valley has been the object of accusations of abuse and neglect during this period. Thus, Billy's having been a great help to the headmaster, his taking care of the young kids, etc., as Mote relates, can perhaps be viewed as sinister in retrospect. Also, we note that the foregoing passage and Mote's letter in its entirety is a direct response to WSB's letter from Tangier to his parents, dated November 9th, 1964, which has been published in the second volume of WSB's letters, Rub Out the Word, on pages 169, 170. WSB, near the end of this letter, asks, what happened about Billy's school? The only reference to Billy in this letter. Mote continues, whatever makes you think you would like to live in the Ozarks? More nostalgia? Anyway, we would be very happy to see you, and it would be wonderful to meet in St. Louis for Christmas. Last week's New York Times review gave the whole second page to Nova Express. I saved it in case you want to read it. Time magazine had a review and a rather nice picture of you, which I also saved. The same issue carried the Grove Company ad, so a lot of publicity has been given Nova Express. Here, I'll quote in abridgment passages from WSB's letter, to which the above quoted portion of Mote's letter is a response. My new novel, Nova Express, is out. I'm leaving here, Tangier, the end of this month for a short trip to England and then to the States. I have an assignment with Playboy to do an article on return to St. Louis. Actually, I may buy a place in the Ozarks to use as a permanent base of operations. Looks like I will be spending Christmas in St. Louis, and we might all meet there like the songs say. WSB did visit his birthplace of St. Louis, Missouri during the Christmas holidays at the end of 1964 and just into 1965, and his famous piece, St. Louis Return, preceded by a now classic interview from the end of his visit, appeared not in Playboy, but in the fall 1965 issue of the Paris Review. Mote asked if the nostalgia evoked by revisiting his childhood neighborhood extended to his idea of buying a base of operations in the Ozark region of Missouri. But we know that, like so much else about this letter and his relationship with his son, Mote's and WSB's understandings of nostalgia were decidedly different. Also, we can imagine the quintessentially Burroughsian, evasively conspiratorial tone of his Ozark statement to have gone right over his father's head. Mote's expression of parental pride at WSB's burgeoning success as a writer with the publication and publicity of Nova Express are touching, though we can safely assume that Mote's comprehension of the depth and significance of this high cut-up masterpiece was less than even that of most of the contemporary critics he refers to. Nevertheless, there is true fondness toward WSB from his parents, despite everything, as evoked in the closing passages of Mote's letter. Let us know when you expect to leave England. It will be wonderful to see you again. Love, Mote. And from WSB toward his parents, as demonstrated in his letter that prompted this response. Of utmost poignancy and sadness is the fact that very soon after Mote typed this letter and was visited by WSB in his historic St. Louis return, he died on January 19th, 1965. Laura Lee then entered into a state of dementia, and Billy entered into technical adulthood. Without his grandparents' supervision to provide even a modicum of structure, poor Billy descended quickly and would precede his father in death by many years. So now I rhetorically ask you, why have we just devoted so lengthy a dissection of Mote's never-before-uncovered letter in this presentation, which is mandated to concern itself with the cut-ups, because it is such a pure and exemplary relic of the cut-up life of William S. Burroughs, with its Potemkin village-like veneer of normality and hope upon the thinnest of ice, its belying of impending and ongoing catastrophe, combined with decorum, sincerity, and real mutual familial devotion. And now we will examine two actual original typed cut-up manuscript pages found among the Center Street documents. This page has the title heading, Morning Campanology for St. Peter. Campanology is defined as the art of bell ringing. At the bottom of this page is the name of Alan Anson, written in blue ink. The non-cursive script does not appear to us as being from the hand of either Anson, WSB's early critical appreciator and friend, nor from WSB himself. We came across an archive of correspondence between Anson and WSB from right around the time of the Center Street residency. But our solicitation to inspect this archive, as we were able to do with Manganotti's, was met with rejection. Therefore, we can only speculate whether this page is the work exclusively of Anson or WSB, or a collaboration between them in the composition of their own and/or borrowed mutually chosen writings. In any case, this page appears to be an interim work product, in which the classic three-column format has been blurred, perhaps bridged, at many junctures, and in which several words, and in 4 cases entire lines across the width of the page, have been X'd out. The text, which has been cut up, appears largely but not entirely to have been sourced from bombastic biblical-style passages, quite possibly from the apocryphal Gospel of St. Peter, mixed with reflective autobiographical phrases that might apply to either of these alienated outsider expatriate writers. Generally, WSB's solo and collaborative published cut-ups are in a 3-column format when they appear in journals, such as the main portion of his contribution to Darazd that we have seen, or in linear, paragraph, full-paged format in book-length novel form, as most exemplified by the post-Naked Lunch trilogy titles in their various incarnations. This page is manifestly an interim work product, and indeed may not be completely or at all a WSB production, and is apparently an unexemplary coalescing of the 2 basic formats, which are in turn arrived at through varying procedures, such as the literal cut-up or the fold-in. Now, just as the cut-ups themselves break free of and subvert the pre-recorded universe controlled by the unholy trinity of time, life, fortune, media, the reader of any cut-up text is encouraged, indeed expected, by WSB to free themselves from conventional habit and therefore further dis and reassemble that text in any manner, thereby creating as many third mind perspectives as there are readers. Again, generally, a columned cut-up can be read down each column left to right, as we would read a newspaper, and/or across the columns. Let's focus on one line across this page, the 12th if we don't count the X'd out 8th line. I allow momentary entrance to the mental summers lie ahead if what I do thou knowest not now. Notice first of all what appears to be a bridge word, the, between the first and second columns, with no space between it and the next word, mental. We can read this line all the way across the page, through its bridged and unbridged column separations, as I have just quoted it. We can also read upward to or downward from each individual section within its column. Reading downward from the first section, up to and including its bridge word, the, here is the very interesting result. I allow momentary entrance to the mind whence much emerges seconds, later stillborn and forgotten. And we can read part of the line, including groups of words which overlap and resonate back and forth, as here. I allow momentary entrance to the mental summers, or the mental summers lie ahead. The 3-word group, the mental summers, is the overlap common to both readings. These methods of reading into the cut-up text apply to its entirety with hardly, if any, limit. For that matter, the methods I have demonstrated here are undoubtedly among countless others, as many as there are readers. Now let's approach the second cut-up page. With no title heading, we casually refer to it by its first sentence. This is L. This page is relatively clearer and easier to read than Morning Campanology for St. Peter, as it's unquestionably authored by WSB, though unsigned, and is firmly within the 3-column format. The sources for the cut-up text appear to be his own and others' writings, mostly emphasizing pornography and popular culture. Depending on how we read this page, the impression it evokes can be quite humorous and coherent, almost as if it were not a cut-up, as here, when we read the 10th line from the bottom across the column page. Most people fear mice, but almost everybody loves Mickey Mouse. But of course, the humor in any WSB text is dark and ironic, and the dominant vibe, as it were, is violent, menacing, and portentous. Reading the 16th line from the top across the page, Mark has draped himself, and she looks up from Johnny's half-eaten genitals. And here are the first 3 lines from the final column. Yet it was my own backyard, TV when the family is out, that the lightning struck. We can also read the first 2 lines in the 3rd line of the first column up to its period with this result. Yet it was in my own backyard, TV on when the family is out, anything but subtle. Every reader is free to variously organize and associate these cut-up passages. To this reader, they seem to evoke WSB looking back to a certain legendary incident that took place in Mexico City when the ugly spirit got the upper hand, and even much further back to WSB's early childhood when he witnessed or was subjected to some unknown depravity by a caregiver, as recounted in the biographies. Elsewhere in this text are references to Walt Disney, Batman, Catwoman, and these last 2 lines that mix pop culture with exemplary, elegiac, Burroughsian imagery. This is a leaking ship, watching soupy sails, on TV while the boat goes down and the waters roll on as they rolled 5,000 years ago. By the way, Soupy Sales was a brilliantly surreal and provocative comedian from my own corner of the USA, who I watched on TV as a young child and much later saw perform in person in his late years. Again, as with the previous page, there may be no limit to how this text can be read, up, down, side to side, and so forth, or to the roiling, kaleidoscopic, and hypnotic impressions it can evoke in every reader. William S. Burroughs was never a happy man, as Miles definitively describes at the end of his magisterial centennial biography, Call Me Burroughs. However, the period we have just explored was the zenith of his deep and supernatural powers as a man of letters. With utmost clarity and confidence, he perfected the cut-up methods and, as we have seen, had achieved a magnetism and influence which caused his contemporaries to drop what they were doing in awed admiration. We have at least begun to scratch the surface of some of the more significant documents in this very important collection. It is a kaleidoscopic collage that depicts and leads us to an understanding, or as much of an understanding as is possible for such an elusive and subjective phenomenon, of the cut-up life and work of William S. Burroughs in real time as it took place. Thank you, and I hope you've had a pleasant trip